Hello and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today is Jane Buxton, whose new novel, Tartufo, is set in a small Italian town. Kira, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh my goodness, it's absolutely my pleasure. I've really been looking forward to this. We had such a good time chatting last time, so
Yes.
yeah, thrilled to see you.
So here's the experience I had when I read the first chapter of the book, and here's the cover. It's just wonderful. Of course, you know what the cover is, but I wanted to show the watching people.
I'm very lucky. Yeah, it's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, the picture of a Tuscan village. So the first chapter is from the point of view of a dog, which I love. I mean, I just think that when a dog is narrating a book, and there have been several, Paul Auster wrote a novel with the dog narrating the book, and the dog is Aria. I'm just fall into the book with just great pleasure. And then when I started, the actual reading of the chapter, Kira, I felt like your words were like filling me up. I mean, it was like eating those words. Isn't that, I never had that experience before. I mean, I've had the experience of like, oh my gosh, this language is so beautiful and things like that. But this was a really physical experience. Like, I got, not drunk on words, but anyway, what a wonderful way to start the book is, I guess, what I'm saying.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I'm gonna keep that in my pocket for eternity. That's so lovely. Um, I'm a big fan of euphonious language, and I love to read a book and be sort of, as you say, sort of get fed by the language, to be filled up, to feel it in your sort of
Right,
soul. Um,
right.
yeah, to savor a sentence like a piece of chocolate. That's one of my favorite
Mhm.
things. And so once I decided to write about truffles, I thought kind of ineluctably the language would have to be about scent, and it would have to be sensuous, and it would have to
Right.
be rich and sort of have its own little siren song. So that was my very lofty goal for it. So to hear you say that is, I mean, my goodness, thank you.
Your first two books were were humorous, and in fact, the first one, Hollow Kingdom, was a finalist for a humor award, the Thurber Prize, right?
Yes.
And this one, certainly, there's humor in this one, but it's a different type of humor. Could you talk? Do you agree? And could you talk about that?
I do agree. I think, I have these moments where I think now is the time I'm going to write a serious novel and there will be no humor in it. But I think all my bones are funny bones. I find humor such a wonderful kind of conduit to tell story and a way for the reader. Once you make somebody laugh, you really open them up to experience emotion, other emotion, in a really sort of profound way, or at least that's been my experience when I read humor. I'm very drawn to it. And I think with Hollow Kingdom, so much of the humor comes from the premise. It's a crow narrating the book. I call him my protagonist. And his name is
Oh,
ST,
that's
which
good.
is his name is ST, which is sort of a profane name. That's his, shortened version of his name. And he's talking about the end of humanity. And in order to tell that story, I had to have this sort of humorous lens, a sort of bird's eye view of the situation, because otherwise
As
it
it
would,
were, a
yes,
bird's eye view, as it were.
as
Yes.
it were. And otherwise, it would have been a very different novel, a very bleak and dark novel. So, for me, that's where most of the humor comes from, is that sort of miscalibration of a crow, who loves our species, who thinks everything we do is marvelous, who thinks the pinnacle of our, sort of legacy is the Cheeto. He loves Cheetos and junk food. So there was so much fun to be had writing ST. For Tartufo, a lot of the humor is more from the chaos that the truffle that's found. It's sort of this, huge, stinky, great sort of treasure that's found that it just sets chaos into motion, and it affects everything that it comes into contact with, which is kind of how a truffle works. They release pheromones, and that's what is attractive to pretty much all animals. Everything wants to
Right.
eat a truffle, from a worm to the boar. It's so yeah. A lot of the humor is different. It's less spicy, I think, than my first two
Mhm.
novels. There's less salty language, which came from The Crow. Which if you know
Right.
crows, it makes
Right.
sense. The language.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What gave you the idea for this book? What was the impetus?
Mm. Well, I grew up. I had a great childhood, really fascinating, interesting childhood. I grew up in a lot of different places, Dubai in the UAE and Jakarta, Indonesia, Ulsan in Korea, Singapore, Texas, lots of different places. But part of this, I guess when I was quite young, my sister and I went up to my mom and sort of said, we don't have any roots. We felt culturally kind of conflicted and wanted that feeling of roots. And my mom, this was in the 90s, like about 94 or 95, she had been editing a magazine article, an expat magazine. And there was a woman who'd written an article about also having this expat experience, but finding her roots in this tiny Italian village, the little
Mhm.
village in Tuscany. So my mom befriended her, and this is, 30 plus years ago, and off we went out to Tuscany, and we went looking at houses and very unimaginatively fell in love with one. And it was this, gorgeous little farmhouse, ancient, with a pizza oven and then a barn, and it just beautiful. And so my parents said, "Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's buy it." And the real estate agent in Italy said, "Well, okay, well, you'll need to get a cash deposit." So they went to the bank and they got a deposit for the house, and it was given to them in the most money they'd ever held physically, in a brown paper bag. And then they were told to go stand in a random bucolic area and just wait. And so they're standing there with this bag of lira, and my mom, I think at the time, was thinking like, is this is a bit like a drug deal, isn't it, darling?" And then this Mercedes came down the hill, and this very elegant woman pops out of the car. She's wearing this beautiful fur coat, and she's got these gorgeous earrings. And to hear my mom describe it, she was so glamorous, darling. You should have seen her boots. And I said, she sounds like Cruella de Vil. And she's like, yes, darling, she did look a bit like Cruella de Vil. So they hand over this money, and the woman just drove off. And at the time, my parents didn't speak Italian. So there was just a lot of, grazie, prego, back and forth. And then she drove off with the money. And my parents are looking at each other going, did we just buy a house or did we get robbed? But they did, they bought a house. That was it. That was the process. And then it was this, it's been 30 years of having this place in Italy, and all the wonderful experiences with the people that live there, and making friends and making pizza in a 100-year-old pizza oven, and watching fireflies strobe across the hill while you're drinking a glass of prosecco. And then crazy stuff like my dad at one point was trying to plant a garden, and something kept eating his vegetables. Anything he planted would be all dug up, the next day. And it turned out it was the cinghiale, the wild boar. And so he was just basically feeding them for quite a long time. So yeah, a lot of I didn't. It's not the exact village that we live in, but it's certainly inspired by, and a love letter, certainly a paean, an homage to what I think is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Yeah.
Um, have you ever read the book or seen the film Enchanted April
No, I
by
have.
Elizabeth von Arnim? I think you would really love that book.
Okay.
It was written probably early in the 20th century, middle of the 20th century maybe, and it's about three women, three very different women from London who decide almost on the spur of the moment to go in together and rent a palazzo in Tuscany. And and what happens to them. It's just a delight. It is available as a film. It's a wonderful audio book. Just to read it is a joy. So take a look at Enchanted April.
It's going right to the top of my TBR.
Okay, then you'll have to email me and tell me what you think. So, do you fall in love with your characters when you're writing?
I do. I do because, and usually the more flawed they are or the quirkier they are, the more I love them. Um, yeah, in my first book, when I started writing Hollow Kingdom, I had the idea that I would write from the perspective of a crow, but I thought it was going to be a sort of really sweet and loving relationship between a crow and a little boy. And I had planned for it to be, quite lovely, this first chapter, and the crow would be very erudite and, and I got started writing it, and then there was salty language flying, and this character, Big Jim, burst onto the page, and I didn't like him at all. I thought I'm going to have to off him immediately. Um, but the more I wrote about him, the more I loved him because he is a very deeply flawed character with very different ideology than I have about certain things. But I really loved his heart. He's a real animal lover who had very difficult choices to make in the course of the novel. And so with Tartufo, I think similarly, I didn't dislike anybody off the bat. There's one character, Duccio, who is he's described as a wet weekend of a man, and he's fairly a bit of an Eeyore of a character. But I really like him as well. Like I really sort of grew to love him the more you kind of understand the choices the character has made and what they've been through and how they've coped. And yeah, it's so much fun unlocking the mysteries of who a character is, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And when the author feels that way, then I think the reader feels that way too. I mean, I'm convinced that that attitude of the author comes across to the reader.
I absolutely agree with that. I think I always think of a book as a distillation of energy. And so you're really tapping into what the author has, shared or intended
Mhm.
with their energy. And so
Mhm.
yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, that's interesting because you open a book and the energy can flow from it to you as the reader. Oh, that's a nice metaphor for that. Wow.
One wonderful thing that happens when it stays with you and it settles into your cells, a story you've read.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of a little bit of magic, I think. Yeah.
So, do you outline for your books? I mean, did you know at the beginning of Tartufo exactly what was going to happen? So you had like an arrow that, was going that way.
I'm a little bit of a middle of the road in terms of, writers, we talk about plotters and pantsers. Pantsers being, fly by the seat of your pants, and plotters being, the people who plot everything right down to the, sentences. I'm in the middle. I have to have some idea of where I'm going, some basic signposts along the way that I can say, okay, I know that this happens at somewhere about this point in the book, but I don't exactly know, the absolute every single plot detail, and that gives me kind of leeway to figure things out. But generally, I'll have a couple of scenes, and I call them candy scenes, and they're the scenes that they play in my head over and over, and I'm so excited to get to those scenes, and I know from the start that those are going to happen. And those I find are motivational. They keep you writing, and you look forward to them and you're excited. And if you feel strongly enough about them, they also tend to be a sort of um, a bar to which the rest of the book has to come up to. So
Hmm.
that's the way I kind of think of it. I dangle carrots for myself.
And do you write those scenes separately? So, do you have those, on your computer as you're writing and you get to that scene, but it's already written. It's not just in your head, or
No,
what?
I taunt myself and I say it basically use it as a motivation to write. So I'll say, okay, I'll get to write that scene once I've got a third of the way through the book because I know it's about the third way mark. Um, so yeah, it's I think if I and I never say never because I feel like every book I write, I'm learning to write a novel all over again. Every book seems completely different, and I have to be open to the process. Um, so if I imagine in the future a time will come when I have to go away and write the candy scene that's ahead to figure out where I am at the
Hmm.
beginning. Um, yeah. But generally, once I've written the first chapter, I tend to write that and I try to get it to a pretty polished level so that anytime I come back to the novel, it's like, okay, this is, this is what I'm aiming for. This is the feel of this. I've started the world building and I've put a character into some
Right.
terrible situation. And where are we going next? Yeah.
Right. Were there particular issues for you as a writer that arose during the writing of Tartufo? You know, something that you didn't expect would be not a game changer, but something that I don't think this would happen to you, but something that made you disinclined to sit down and write
Yeah,
that
this is actually
scene or.
it's a great question. I was hugely intimidated by the number of characters.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe I'm tackling too many. Is this going to be overwhelming for the reader? I'd never had to do so many scenes where, these sort of quips and quick interactions are happening between characters, but the reader also has to remember who each of them are. And, um, but I saw it as a good challenge, and I thought it was sort of necessary because I'm writing about a village, and I wanted the village represented,
Right.
these lovely characters, and that I think was the biggest challenge for me. I think daily I would show up at the page and think, ooh, too many, and sometimes I'd lose a character. Sometimes I didn't know where Duccio had gone off to. So keeping track of
Right.
everyone. Um, but it's funny to me that that is less intimidating than writing from the perspective of the animals, which I often do in my work. I find
Uh-huh.
that doesn't intimidate me at all. I find that to be really sort of freeing and interesting. I think because our stories are often so anthropocentric, it's kind of to me lovely to open up and imagine what the bee experiences, or
Right.
what the actual truffle is doing, and that kind of. I find that adds a kind of interesting richness and a sort of environmental consciousness to what I'm doing. But it's funny that this was really the first novel where I thought, ooh, I'm writing about a lot of people. Am I qualified? Do I know humans well enough?
You do include a table of characters for the reader to keep track of, but yeah, I'm not so convinced. I know people don't like to get lost among the different characters, but I always find that you have to just go with the flow, and and if this character shows up here, no doubt they'll show up later, or I'll learn more
Yes.
about them without having to say, oh, that's the town butcher or whatever.
That's right.
Um,
Yes.
so we don't have a lot of time left, but what are you reading? What are you enjoying?
Oh, lovely. What am I reading? I've just in the moment I've just started Ugly Beautiful by Alice Feeney, which I'm really enjoying. Lovely, like pulled into it right away. So great. I read Dragon's Bane by Barbara
Uh-huh.
Hamilton, which was on my radar because I watched a podcast interview with Brandon Sanderson, and he raved about it. And the way he described it, it sounded exactly the type of book I love to read. A fantasy that's really a feminist take, and I just it was so, and it did not disappoint. And speaking of euphonious language, it was absolutely stunning. So
Yeah.
I loved it. I read recently Orbital by Samantha
Oh
Harvey.
yeah. Yes.
Did you?
Yeah.
What did you think?
I thought it was brilliant.
Yes. I
Yeah.
loved it. It made me absolutely 100% double down on that I do not want to go to space.
Right.
But I love that it just was this beautiful, really it elucidated this idea of the overview effect, which is, I think Michael Collins was one of the first astronauts to experience it, looking down at our
Right.
planet and realizing, sort of cognitively recognizing, goodness, what a beautiful, beautiful place, and what a fragile, gorgeous planet we live on, and then they all
Right.
those that experienced it felt moved to sort of be advocates and protect it, which I
Yeah.
just think is beautiful. And so she did such a beautiful job of.
She did. Yeah. And and can we expect a new novel sometime in the next couple of years from
I,
you?
I I think I hope I'm working on a couple of things. One is funny fantasy, and the other one is so wild. I have absolutely no idea if it will end up as a novel, but I feel in my gut that it will. And I'm kind of weirdly superstitious to say what it's about.
Oh yeah, no need to do that. Who's your first reader? Who do you trust the most?
Do you know, I'm so lucky. I have a very long suffering husband who it's not easy being the spouse of a writer, I think. But he's wonderful. And everything I write, I'll read him a chapter and he will, listen. So I read it aloud each chapter as I've written it to him. And that's wonderful because
Yeah.
you get a sense of what the reader is experiencing and where they think it's going next. And, you can tell if something's working, especially I write a lot of humor, so I can see where the jokes land and where they
Right,
don't.
right. That's what I was thinking would be so important.
Yes. It's a dicey thing to do for a marriage, I must say, but but it's fantastic. Just a quick anecdote about being the spouse of a writer. We were at the Literary Lions event for the King County Library System, and we're so lucky to be honored there. And I was sitting next to another author, and we were busy signing our books, and her husband was also there. So her husband and my husband struck up a conversation, and she writes thrillers. And so, her husband said to mine, do you think it's a little scary and creepy? Like, my wife has killed so many people. In this novel, she's killed off so many people. And my husband turned to this man and without skipping a beat, he said, "My wife wiped out the human race."
That's great.
Love that.
That's great. Kira, it's been so nice talking to you again. And I look forward to many of our viewers, listeners, reading Tartufo and getting the same kind of pleasure that I did out of it.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. This went by so quickly. I could
No,
chat for so long. I thank you so much for having me. It's always such a treat to chat with you. And yeah, this is entirely my pleasure.
me too. Back at you. Thank you.